Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 5G IoT Summit, Reinventing the World with IoT in the 5G era. My name is Shane Rooney, and I'm going to be talking a little bit more about the agenda when I come to it in terms of how it's structured for the afternoon. So just a little bit about what we're doing at the GSMA. With regards to IoT, many of you have been involved with our mobile IoT forum and our initiative in the last 5 years or so. And we've been focusing now how we bring mobile IoT, which is LTE-M, narrowband IoT, into 5G. So it's when it becomes part of Massive IoT. So we're focused right now in terms of how we do that and how we bring mobile IoT and how we can scale that up with things like roaming, how we do the provisioning, trying to make that easier for customers to make deployments happen on a much faster basis, how energy in the networks and the devices, which is most important for low-powered wide area networks, how that's managed and becomes more efficient, and also how we deal with coverage and how we're making that more available to customers as we go along. So just a couple of slides really on where we are and the status of things. We've obviously experienced some short-term disruption with IoT deployments because of the pandemic, of course, but and that's where people are not being able to get out and deploy that. But there's some, long-term upsides to that as well, because we've seen, this growth that we're going to expect post-pandemic is going to help things in the future. We've had supply chain issues, which highlights what the need for IoT, and of course semiconductor shortages that has delayed things as well. So just to focus a little bit on what we think some of those legacy drivers for IoT will be from the COVID pandemic that we had. There's been obviously a lot more emphasis on health and safety. We've seen the cashless society accelerate, into automation. We have had more of a need and acceptance for the use of IoT, and then perhaps an increased trust as we move towards automation solutions and how analytics will start driving AI and making it a lot better as we go forward. And one of the key areas will be the supply chain, the issues that we experienced over the last 2 years or so. And from a technology point of view, we're in that transition phase where we're seeing the emergence of 5G and the shutting down of 2G and 3G. And that's where we will see a lot of the growth of mobile IoT and massive IoT start to take its place, because that's part of the story of 5G. We've also seen some new use cases that we hadn't sort of picked up on or has been there, but a much more greater need from a customer point of view in that area. And the age-old smart cities, which have been talked about for so many years or so, I think this could be a turning point for smart cities as we tend to make IoT solutions to automate some of those cities in transportation and how we get around and how we deal with the environment. With 5G, of course, as well, we are seeing the emergence of wireless smart factories, private 5G networks, and making smart factories a reality. Just a quick summary of, for those who had been involved in the Mobile IoT initiative, we now have over 170 networks for Mobile IoT. And at the time, we said that LTE-M and narrowband IoT was pretty much complementary, depending on the use case. I think that statement has been borne out because we are seeing many networks now deploying both technologies. And from a GSMA point of view, you may have know all about the foundry, our GSMA foundry, and this is an opportunity if you've got an IoT idea to work with partners hosted by the GSMA, and I would encourage you to come and talk to us if you want to accelerate or exploit an IoT idea with us. If you go to the GSMA stage, the membership stand area, we'll be happy to talk to you there about that. And finally, I'd like to thank our sponsors, G&D and Kigen, for today's event. And we're now going to have our first speaker. I'll talk about the agenda on this one first. So the agenda is split into two areas this week, this afternoon. The first part is really about analytics and the technology, how we're going to scale that up. And so we have a host of speakers and a panel to talk about how we're doing that. And that will finish, and we will have a short break. And the second half is going to focus on data, how that's been managed, what's new happening in that area, and if you like, around SIM and the new developments around SIM as well. So our first speaker is the CEO of G&D Mobile Security, Carsten Ahrens, and Carsten will give us a talk just after this short video. Thank you.
With 5G, a future of possibilities is right on our doorstep, which will completely change how we interact with wireless devices and how devices interact with each other. 5G networks are the next generation of mobile internet connectivity, offering much faster speeds with more reliable connections than ever before. G&D, with its secure and trustworthy products and solutions, is already the partner for secure device-to-device communication and will continue to guard your path to a next-generation network. There will be the chance to truly take advantage of technologies such as automation and IoT. For example, self-driving cars talking to sensors embedded in the streets, or even medical devices which enable healthcare doctors to monitor patients more efficiently. Technology will expand business opportunities through large-scale monitoring, tracking, and automation capabilities, from connecting farms and agriculture, smart cities and buildings, to providing better connectivity between heavy machinery, smart grids, and remote surgeries. With G&D, security is no longer an issue. Join us and be ready for the future. Connectivity is equals security, and we fill the gap between people and IoT.
Yeah, so welcome everyone. It's great to be back. This is the sentence to say when you walk on stage these days. I think we're all very happy that we have the opportunity to meet again in person, and it's great to see so many of you who have taken the opportunity to participate in this IoT summit. Within the next 15 to 20 minutes, I will be talking about, and this is the theme for the whole Congress, about unleash or unleash. How do we unleash the potential of IoT? And I can tell you so much at the moment, right now here, is that there's a few things that I think the industry still needs to do in order to really unleash the full potential. But before I do that, let me start with a little anecdote. 31 years ago, believe it or not, the first GSM networks in the world were launched actually in Germany, T-Mobile, and at that time, Mannesmann Mobilfunk. I know this so well because it didn't only have the first SIM card from our company, but I was also working as an engineer writing some code for that network. At that time, Mannesmann had a business plan that was talking about acquiring roughly, well, a low-digit number of subscribers. That was their business plan. In the first year, 1991, after launch, the network was there, it was up and running, it all worked very well. The problem was that there were no terminals. So it was actually in one of the events at the time, these were just conferences, not so big fairs, by the GSMA, and it was the head of the GSMA, his name was George Schmidt, very famous statement. He was standing on stage and said, "Do you know what GSM stands for?" He was looking up and he said, "Well, it stands for God Sent Mobiles." Why am I telling you all this? Because 1 year later, only 1 year later, when the phones were there, they were adding millions of subscribers every month. So 2 messages. One, you need to have a purpose. The purpose was to give phones and to use mobile communication. People wanted to have it. But the second message is that things typically take a little longer until they happen, but when they happen big time. So let's look a little bit at the numbers. Some numbers you already saw in the previous slide, so the numbers are big. But one thing I really want you to remember from this speech is, and that is, the IoT, the Internet of Things, is the biggest machine that we will ever build. And we have to make it secure. Because if we don't do it, we're going to head for some real trouble. But before I start expanding on this a little bit, let me just recap real quick on what is this actually all about. Why are we doing this? And it might sound and look trivial and very obvious to you, but trust me, I will come back to some of those points and explain to you why this is not going to happen by itself, why we actually need to do some stuff which is technically quite sophisticated and certainly not for free. So why are we doing this in the first place? It's all about connecting devices, receiving contextual information from those devices, doing an analysis on what you're receiving, more and more with artificial intelligence and algorithms, and then often actually sending automated commands back to those devices. And in order to be able to do this, you obviously need to have a scalable and hands-free deployment of it. You also need to have standards. And here I really would like to give a big hand to the GSMA, because one red thread I think is going to go through all this program this afternoon, and that's the eSIM story. And I think the GSMA, without them, it wouldn't have happened, and they have been instrumental in helping the industry to really find the specifications for that. You need to obviously have reliable global connectivity to do it. You need to have device security and recovery. And last but not least, you need to have a purpose, which will only come with the real necessary IoT applications. There's one thing, if you kind of read with me this slide, that I didn't mention, and that is security. 2 years ago, I had the pleasure to actually listen to Bruce, who you can see on this slide. The guy has written 14 books on cybersecurity, and I put a quote from in there, which basically talks about that this is about receiving data and sending it to an algorithm. Actually, you could look upon every data record that we will be sending over these IoT networks to be a training sequence. Just think about that there's a man in the middle, falsifies that data, and you send wrong training data to these algorithms. So you tell them wrong stuff. They will come to some dramatically wrong consequences. And I think we really need to get it, that we need to put the foot in the door here and make sure that this is not going to happen, because otherwise we're going to head for some big trouble. So IoT is all about, and I would actually go as far as to say it's only about data. But it's about trusted data. And this chart I thought was quite telling because it's from GSMA Intelligence. It talks about a market which is bigger than 900 billion. And 67%, so close to 70% of the value will be generated from the data. And only 5% is actually for connectivity. So this chart looks a little busy. I will walk you through this, so this is going to take a moment, so bear with me. It starts right here at the bottom with the SIM. 31 years ago, the first SIM was shipped. The SIM has actually not really ever been compromised. There's been various attacks on cards, on single cards, and when there were poor implementations, there was some success. But the real success was happening when data was in transit. So it's a proven technology that has been around for a very long time. So we certainly believe that the SIM is the root of trust in IoT, for cellular IoT for sure. Now, with eSIM, which is the next part here, we have actually decomposed the SIM card. The SIM card has 4 components. It's the card body, then you have the chip, then you have the operating system that runs on the chip, and you have the profile. And this has been decomposed into 3 elements. We basically got rid of the plastic. We only have the chip, we have the operating system, and the profile. G&D has shipped more than close to 600 million embedded OS licenses over the last couple of years. And people work with us because they do trust us and they know that we will do this right. The evolution of this plastic-based chip is to eSIM and then also iSIM. I think we'll be talking about that quite a bit later in the sessions here today. That means that the second component, which is the dedicated microcontroller, will also go away, and we're going to put the operating system and the profile into the controller, baseband controller that is. The next thing is that with all this, when we're going to put the chips into the hardware, this is actually coming with some prices. It comes at some prices in terms of complexity, because if you imagine that you're a module maker and all of a sudden you don't just have a tray, but you want to put an eSIM there, the eSIM needs to run an operating system, it becomes more complicated. So what you need is a facility that helps you to actually do this provisioning inline. We call this inline personalization in the factory. This is stuff that the industry is working with and that we can offer to the market today. But there's also a wonderful plus in doing so, because now you can not only load an operating system, but you can also load a profile, which then makes this module or piece of hardware connect. It's called Bootstrap. And then there are elegant ways of doing Bootstrap and maybe not so elegant ways of doing Bootstrap, because if you just put a profile there, you're going to use up IMSI ranges of operators who are sometimes not so keen on doing that. And also there, I think it's an interesting piece of technology that we are looking at and that we have developed. The next thing is the personalization, the data generation. This is really the core. This is really where operators are super critical, and they only have a handful of companies that they actually do trust and work with. Also here, new technology is required. Why? In the past, we were doing batches of cards. It was the same card. It was serialized, 50,000, 100,000, 20 million, 30 million of the same card, more or less. So the systems that were doing this in batch mode. In the future, and especially if you consider to use the eSIM technology, which is ready to do more than just network authentication, I mean, this is kind of what it does, but also do application authentication and encryption. You're going to put more applications, or we call them applets, onto those cards. And they will be different from application to application. So you need to have a machine that can generate not batches, but maybe even lot size 1, and maybe even real time. So this is the next big step that we are doing and that we have available. Then comes obviously what we're all waiting for, profile activations. This is when this device lights up in the network and gets the connectivity for the first time. And also here, this is what I'm telling my team all the time, we're performing this in front of the world. So you need to have ultra reliable stuff. And again, that doesn't come for free. You need to have full geo-redundant disaster recovery solutions in order to deliver, because we're talking about things that will work in real time. If the profile download doesn't work, the device won't connect unless it has just the basic bootstrap connectivity, right? So you need 4 nines at least in order to be able to deliver this. The next thing is connectivity. So obviously, this is what our operator customers are doing. You want to make sure that you have good coverage, you have reliable coverage wherever it is needed. And then you have the connectivity lifecycle management, which is actually the single pane of glass you would like as an enterprise now, if you would like to see where your devices are, how the connections are working. You need to have that single view in order to see how your devices, are they connected, are they having a good radio signal, and so forth. G&D has made a small acquisition in the summer last year, a small MVNO called Pod Group. And we're working with them in order to really pull everything together and also to put skin in the game and show that we're not only a SIM manufacturer and a leader in eSIM, but we also have the connectivity piece to it. And this is important because with that, we can do these bootstrap, the clever bootstrap technologies that we have talked about earlier, because that requires more technology. And then you have IoT application management. The next thing that I wanted to show you is the ecosystem, because we sometimes refer to this picture as the hamburger model. It's a pretty thick hamburger with a lot of stuff in there. It starts at the bottom with a chip design with the usual suspects such as ARM. Then you have the chip. Then you have the people like ourselves doing the operating systems for that chip and also then the profile. You have the module makers. The module goes into an internet IoT device. You have the infrastructure vendors, such as Ericsson, Nokia, Huawei, and so forth. You have the MNOs. And you have IoT cloud providers. And you also have the data analytics layer. And I think that's, when you walk around in the halls, that's another thing that I discover when I have all these conversations with the various players. I think the industry is very, very focused at the moment at focusing at the technological components. I think the technology is there, it's ready, it can be made secure if we do what we have just discovered and discussed here. I think now we should do more vertical integration here and really drive the application, because at the end of the day, I repeat, it is only about the trusted data. The rest is just plumbing to put the technology components together. So there's a lack of this vertical integration, which is why we have done that step, and we will continue and also add more applications on top of that. So this brings me to the last picture of this presentation. And what you can see on this picture is actually on the left-hand side, on the y-axis, you see the data volume. And on the x-axis, you see the amount of devices. So I would say, certainly for mobile operators and for the things that they do really well, the left side of this picture from your perspective is a quadrant, or is an area where most of the MNOs will be focusing on. And one of the applications that is most looked at the moment is obviously what? It's automotive. Yeah? Not so many vehicles, 70 million vehicles, roughly, I would guess, will be sold this year, partly also because of the chip issues, but roughly it's between 70 and 90 million typically. And they transmit, if this goes more into electric and if this goes more into autonomous drive, they will transmit, some say terabytes of data a day. So obviously this is a play of very high value. There comes another one next to it, and I think that's very much talked about here at this Mobile World Congress 2022, and that's campus networks or private LTE. In Germany, 150 licenses have been handed out. You can either do it and apply for a license and build your own network. Then you need to have somebody that helps you also then with the connectivity and the SIM and the personalization and all that. But you can also do it with using network slices from an MNO and then use the gear from the MNO. So this, I think, is also going to be an area where we are going to see a lot of activity from the MNO community. And then you have a rather large part that I put there into the middle of it, which is then going to be a whole heap of vertically fully integrated applications, which are to some extent, I would say, still evolving. There's very, very classical ones like track and trace that we've been talking about forever, but you would be surprised if you double click into this field, how much yet can be done. And I think that's a part where most of the MNOs are struggling because this is not really their core business. So here you need to have people that are helping them to develop that. And then on the right-hand side, it gets even more diversified. So for that part, you need to have platform capabilities. You need to be able to give these developers that are working then on this sometimes also referred long tail, to give them the tools so that they can develop stuff which is then secure. So I think this is a good picture. This is at least the way how we have structured it for ourselves and what needs to be done in the different segments. So there isn't a one-size-fits-all in order to drive this forward. And this brings me to the last slide. Trusted data is the oil of the global connected society, and the connectivity is the pipeline to pull it all together. And it is our vision to help you to monetize the data that will be transmitted over those IoT networks. And with that, I'm excited to listen to the other presentations, so thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you.
Thank you, Carsten. Thank you for putting all the pieces of the jigsaw there for us. How do we grow cellular-based IoT to a hyperscale level? Well, our next speaker, Matt Hatton from Transforma Insights, hopefully will be able to tell us how we do that. So, Matt.
Thank you very much. I probably should take one of those, should I? Thank you. Thank you, Shane. Oh. My theme tune was playing. As Carsten said, it's kind of obligatory to say, I should take my mask off, crikey. Obligatory to take your mask off when you're on stage, and also obligatory to say what a delight it is to be in front of a room full of people rather than stuck in front of a Zoom call. What I'd like to talk to you about today, well, I should introduce myself first. Matt Hatton, Transforma Insights. We're an industry analyst firm focused ostensibly on IoT. And what I wanted to talk about is this concept of hyperscale and how hyperscale might apply to the provision of connectivity. We've all been here for now, or most of us have been here for 3 days, and we've had the opportunity to talk to a lot of different people. If you're like me, you pretty much see nothing but the inside of a meeting room or the inside of cafes, so it's back-to-back meetings. But you get a feel for what's going on in the industry, the things that are developing, the trends that are happening. You kind of come here thinking, I pretty much know what's going on in IoT or know what's going on in my space. But you have these conversations and you get a feel for, actually, maybe I've thought about it in a slightly the wrong way, or I get a different feel for something that might be happening, a key trend in the space. One of the things that I have been talking to a lot of people about, both connectivity providers and the vendors who are supporting them, is this need to get to hyperscale in terms of the provision of connectivity. Now, When I knew I was speaking at this session, I had to give them a title for my presentation and predicted that I'd be talking to a lot of people about hyperscale, and so it has proven. And I want to talk about how hyperscale is important to specifically 5G IoT. Now, you're going to groan when you see my first slide because it is yet another slide showing market forecasts. And, you know, as industry analysts, this is, again, the obligatory slide for an analyst presentation. This one was showing the number of cellular-based IoT connections that we're expecting over the next 10 years, going from about 1 billion now to about 5 billion in 2020. But the important thing with this is really that 5G piece of it is the dominant driver of the adoption of IoT, cellular-based IoT connectivity. Now, in some cases, because 2G and 3G networks aren't going to be available for very much longer, if indeed they're available now. But some of the capabilities, the functionality within, say, NB-IoT and LTE-M, those technologies which are included or will be ultimately included as 5G MMTC, are absolutely critical for driving the market. Now, a big number is a big number. It's all very interesting, but it's worth digging into that a little bit. And this is the total number of cellular IoT shipments by use case in 2025. And there's a lot of diversity in there. Now, it's concentrated in certain particular verticals. There's an awful lot of connected cars, an awful lot of asset tracking, smart grid, smart metering, all of those good things. But the point is, as in fact Carsten set it up neatly for me by talking about the varying different approaches, and that's absolutely true. You have connected vehicles, so that's your high-end, high-value connectivity, your 5G, NR, that sort of approach to the market. Smart grid, in contrast, it's very much a procurement-led approach. You've got a very specific set of environments in which the devices are deployed. They have particular requirements that are possibly not seen in many other spaces. And the way that a network operator might address those will be very different. And asset tracking, well, we've lumped together a whole host of different use cases under the concept of asset tracking. So that might be bike and scooter sharing, or it could be tracking pharmaceuticals through the supply chain, and any number of other different use cases. And the point is there, maybe that's the procurement there, the buying, the contract sizes may be only a few tens of thousands of connections. So the way that you would address that market is also rather different. So not only is the technology diverse, but so too are the commercial arrangements and the commercial relationships that have to be put in place, and the way that it might be addressed by the device manufacturers and by the communication service providers. One of the big things that we do as part of our research is we spend a lot of time analyzing the strategies of communication service providers, MNOs, MVNOs, call them what you will. We produce things like this, which are identifying, you know, who are the key players, who has what we think is the most, say, future-proof strategy for how to address the market. But the main reason we do this is because we want to know who's best placed to address some of the critical trends, the sort of macro level challenges that are in the space. And there's one in particular. There are many, of course, as you all know, but there's one in particular that we highlight, a concept that we've termed $1 IoT. Now, we're being a bit contentious talking about $1 IoT, $1 revenue per year. Now, it's not going to be the overwhelming or the levels of revenue you'll expect to see for every device, but there are a lot of sensing devices, a lot of devices that are going to go into the market that are going to generate very small amounts of revenue. Not going to be the entirety of it, but there's certainly going to be a significant number. And in that scenario, I mean, here's a couple of examples of that kind of pricing, if the slides will move on, which they don't seem to be keen to do, but there we go. Okay, couple of examples. We're already seeing this level of pricing available for some IoT use cases, IoT applications. The question is, how do you deal with that? Typically, the systems have evolved from supporting handsets and mobile broadband connections, which are generating, tens, if not hundreds of dollars per year in terms of revenue. They've evolved a lot. We've had a move to a sort of a platformization of IoT to drive out some of the costs and complexity. We've got new technologies available to do that. But that's perhaps not quite enough in its own right. So that platformization goes some way, but it doesn't address the entirety of the challenge. You've got platforms for connectivity management, you've got platforms for application enablement, just driving out the complexity associated with it. So anyone who's involved in the connectivity business is looking at this prevailing trend of price erosion and saying, okay, what do I do? How do I address this? And then there's many ways of doing it. You can look to move up the stack and go into vertical sectors, delivering a full stack solution. And some providers have done that. The challenge there is you're typically getting into a market which is occupied by a bunch of other vendors. You can also get into consulting. You can move into some horizontal layers, things to do with data analytics, or I've mentioned application enablement platforms. Data exchange is another topic that we talk about quite a lot. Shane was talking about smart cities. We see a lot of data exchange in smart cities, putting data into a central repository and allowing for the trading of that data. So everyone involved in this connectivity business is looking at, okay, well, how do I address that? There's one other way which we think is the principal way, and really to put it back to the question of 5G IoT, it's this concept of hyperscale IoT connectivity. Being able to scale up your systems and processes and capabilities to be able to address what we expect to be tens or potentially hundreds of millions of connected devices. So things like having ultra-efficient connectivity, onboarding, and management. It's things like being cloud native, doing everything in the cloud. It's also around business organization. Okay, does it really make sense to send out a salesperson to sell SIM cards or whatever the eSIM or iSIM equivalent, sell connectivity? Wouldn't it be better to imitate the approach that's taken by the hyperscale cloud providers and be much more automated in all of these processes? And I mean, it won't have escaped your notice that I've effectively borrowed the hyperscale term from the hyperscale cloud providers, but really it's about being more, focusing more on doing the kind of things, working in the kind of ways that AWS and Microsoft do. And I think the message is there, and certainly the conversations we have are around that. One critical thing, to bring it back to the mobile IoT 5G topic, one absolutely critical thing will be those 5G technologies, particularly the MMTC technologies, because if this is about supporting hundreds of millions of connected devices in an efficient and effective way, really that's got to be done by using these new low-power technologies that are becoming available. And at that point, I will hand you back to Shane. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Matt. So lots and lots of things to think about there in terms of how we deal with growth. So we're going to have another view on how we deal with growth now with our next speaker, Vincent Korstanje, who's the CEO of Kigen.
Some great topics there, really nice. And actually, to put it into Carsten's context, I really want to look at how we can look at that long tail. How can we push the long tail? That's what we really find interesting. So thank you for that introduction, really interesting. We also came from a slightly different angle, so I'd like to talk about that as well. But before I do that, the obligatory hello. Great to see you in person. I really missed it. I know I love the energy of the show this year. And after 2 years, it's fantastic. See you all in 3D. Little startling, little daunting. It's 3 years ago since I last stood on a stage, so I apologize if the performance is not slightly as smooth as it could have been, but thank you very much for listening to me. And up till now, my life has been really much like this, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who has life like this, right? But we have done a lot of Zoom calls, we have done a lot of working from home, and actually I love that, because I've been able to look into your homes, right? And you've been able to look into my home. And that's really interesting, because now you have your children in the background. Anyone? Yeah? Or maybe in the foreground. Anyone? Nice thing to do with a colleague is to promise the 4-year-old an ice cream. No, just a little joke. Always good to see people, understand people. Fantastic. It has changed the way we work. It has changed the way our home and our work-life balance changes. And sometimes it actually becomes home and work life becomes so integrated that that can be a problem. So in the second lockdown in the UK, now I got a little crazy. I decided, well, actually it's time for me to do something. Also about this, slightly podgy in the first lockdown. So after 17 years of not running, I decided to go back into running. Any runners here? Right. Running has changed. I thought I put on a pair of shoes and I go running, and it's just the same as it was before. But actually, I'd missed something. Now you can see it, I'm wearing it. The smartwatch, especially the running aimed smartwatches. Not only is it a watch, actually a personalized coach. It gives you feedback on what you're doing, how you're doing it, gives you a training schedule, tells you your location, tells you how far you went, how fast you went. It's amazing. And actually my whole running experience changed. It's much easier for me. I actually did a lot more running. I was motivated. It told me why I'm struggling today and why I'm feeling great tomorrow. It's very interesting. So this product is not a product, it becomes a service. It's a coach, it's a trainer. And that is to me the pinnacle of IoT. How can we make products into services? And the interesting thing of these watches is, actually talking about 5G, quite a few of these watches are going cordless, if you will. And then cordless, I think about mobile phone. So they give up the mobile phone and they're going to directly communicate with the cloud. They're not trying to be a mobile phone. Some of these watches, you cannot make phone calls, but you can do multiple things like now tracking. Your family can see if you're running a marathon, how fast you go. They can give you a little voicemail saying, "Come on, Dad, keep going." Very interesting. And clearly, this brings, to make this happen in that long tail, it brings a couple of challenges. It's a challenge of now battery life. And we'll talk a bit about energy, but energy is really important in these devices. About data volume. If you have a camera on this and you're starting to stream data back, the terabytes, the MNOs in the room might love it, but the battery will hate it. Right? Streaming back lots of data is not perfect. We talked about connectivity. I'd like to see the chart. Very often I run at home in the UK. I did manage to get a run here in Barcelona as well. Great, needs to work here too. And if I go on holiday in, say, Fuerteventura or anywhere else, you want your watch to work, you want your service to be there. So, to walk that backwards, the key thing is seamless connectivity. Now, we are working toward that as an industry, but there's definitely work to be done. If you look at some of these modules, some of these products, you'll see that they work in a US SKU, a Europe SKU, don't quite work in every country yet. Now clearly, that is fine for a beginning industry, but if you really want to scale, we need to solve that problem. Move the intelligence to the edge. Now we talk a lot about edge, so there's some different definitions. What do I mean? So effectively, you take your algorithm and you put it onto your watch or onto your device. So instead of streaming back a camera stream, for image recognition, you do it on the device and you just say, "Dad has come home." You effectively summarize the data. Now that is fantastic, great for battery life, great for less communication. Clearly now some of the intelligence lives on your device. So you better secure the device and better make sure that nobody steals your crown jewels. And then supply chain flexibility. If we are looking at that many devices, it can't be one company that produces them all. It is about the innovation. I love the fact that we have, for instance, on the show floor, if you've not seen that in Hall 5, Oral-B, toothbrushes. Has anybody expected 3 years ago that a toothbrush company would be at the Mobile World Congress? It's amazing the use cases we are discovering. And if you create the right components and create the right supply chains, people will start innovating. And last but not least, I think it was mentioned already, is the trust in the data. If you can't trust the data, then the big data, which you're trying to create decisions on, becomes completely useless. So what I like to say is little data. So big data starts with little data. You have to kind of secure the data, make sure you know where it comes from, you make sure it isn't tampered with to really now create conclusions. So that becomes smart data. And when we were thinking about that, back in the days that Kigen was founded, we're thinking that actually the GSMA has done an amazing job. Carsten, you have done an amazing job in your early career creating a SIM. The SIM is a fantastic form factor, fantastic product, very secure, great place to base our security. Now, a SIM is a little inconvenient in IoT because it creates a hole in the site, not quite what we want, so we came up with the eSIM. And then actually we went to the next step. If you do an eSIM as an industry, you can also integrate it into your baseband processor on one of the other chips, and you can make the form factor even smaller. And this allows you to push the device further down in size, further down in power usage, further down in integration, make it easier to use, and thus opening up more and more opportunities. Allows you to create the security not just around the network, and also see a couple of examples. You can also create the security on the next plane when the IoT application starts playing. And last but not least, very important that you scale your solutions from 2G all the way to 5G to make sure that everybody can now onboard onto your process. Not everywhere in the world are the 5G standards are rolled out yet. So very important you create a pathway for people to go with their device from the earlier technologies to the later ones. So we did quite a few announcements this year, or last year, the last 12 months. Actually, you had the GSMA saying that how amazed they were how fast iSIM has been developed in the market in general. And we've seen quite a few of these customers or partners talking with us, talking around us, having iSIM available. With AT&T, we are looking at creating a flexible supply chain, making sure that it's really easy to onboard iSIM onto their network. With people like Altair, we had a long-standing relationship, bringing people like Vodafone, Flowlife, Trufone, and Soracom into that supply chain as well, making it again easy for choice, making sure it becomes very convenient for people to roll out. We're working with module makers. There are probably about 6 modules out there, but publicly we're announced with Sierra and with Murata, and then with Infineon and Simcom, we're looking at the eSIM side as well. So you can see there's a lot of momentum in the industry, which we're really pleased with, and a lot of excitement. Now, Kigen was originally founded by ARM, so we're a spin-out of ARM, for those who don't know, and I thought I'd steal their slides. On the way out, it's always good to grab a couple of good things. So this is their slide. I think some of the references on the numbers, and this is their shipments last year. They effectively have created IP into 32 billion devices that shipped in 2021. Went quite well because of the pandemic. We all wanted more electronics, so now it gives you an idea of how much silicon this world is shipping. Now, not all IoT devices, but if it is half of these are IoT devices, right? This is what we need to look at. How can we create those devices and make them into a service? Connect them, innovate, and bring a lot more value to this market. So, what do we need to focus on to make it scale wider? Well, we need to focus on cost effectiveness. Now, cost effectiveness isn't any of us halving our price. It is effectively innovating 1,000 little cuts in the device and pushing that value, that price down so that we can extend the use cases. That it can become applicable everywhere. Connectivity has fantastic benefit over Wi-Fi. It just works. But it needs to kind of be pushed down all the way. We need to make sure it makes it easy for people to upgrade to this technology as well. So make sure it's compatible going backwards. And then the thing I've already talked about, energy efficiency. Really important, important for the planet, but also important for that battery life and making it really useful. You do not want to be on that run and halfway through, especially if you go a little further, halfway through, run out of battery and need to bring another phone. So once you embed security and you have trusted and smart data, you can do other things. And we always envisaged that you can start using that to secure the data going up. My colleague Paul Bradley was here last year. He lives in France, so he could come. And he talked about IoT Safe, or Open IoT Safe. And we're very, very pleased to announce earlier this week that together with Core and Kigen, we enabled a company called Energy Web to sign their data coming off the device. So they use the SIM to sign the data coming off the device. This way, they know that the data coming off the device, be it a smart meter, a solar collector, right, or any other energy generator or user, comes the data off the device, they can sign it, they know it's good data. Once they know it's good data, they create a marketplace for people to innovate around that data and help us drive to net zero. So very interesting that we see more and more of these use cases with data appearing. Oh, there we go. It's a little slow. Maybe you should have a cellular connectivity in here, but anyway. So other use cases. Not only energy, but there are lots and lots of these use cases. For instance, agriculture. Think about a moisture meter in a farm. If the whole world gets moisture metered, that actually becomes really interesting information. You can maybe sell that to weather predictors, or you can sell that to governments. But you have to know that this data is trusted. You have to know that the data is good. So again, the signing of the data to making sure that the security is really strong around that, very important. On the healthcare, maybe the opposite problem. You want to make sure that you can do things more localized for privacy reasons. Bring things local to your device. Again, security becomes really important. Later this afternoon, we also have a talk by Zariat. They will talk a little bit more about this. This is similar, and this is now looking at the privacy of data and making sure you have full control of data privacy. Really interesting, again, it is a SIM being used to sign the data, to encrypt the data, to make sure that, the heritage of the data is useful. So it starts happening. Now, talking about going vertical, I think to me it's about going up the stack, enabling more of this. This is a really interesting way for us as an industry to drive a lot of value. For our Open IoT Safe, we keep investing. This is an open standard, so you can join. We invest to make sure that we have good solutions. So you can see we already had OpenSSL, very important library for communication in Linux. The ARM embedded TLS stack, and we now added the Wolf SSL recently. So we have effectively the 80% of the market now is supported by this standard. It allows you to start using the SIM as a data safe, which allows you to go easy enrollment into your favorite cloud, or sign your data. Many different applications, very useful for you to innovate on in the market. And more things are happening. Someone said to me last night at dinner, they are hearing more about iSIM than eSIM. So you can see there's a lot of market momentum around that. So on the show floor, these companies, Quicktell, I took the photo of their module with iSIM. Sequans announced EEL5 Plus certified hardware, where they're effectively pushing the envelope in better security. Allows you to go maybe into medical, into more use cases. Truephone, Vodafone, and more, everybody is talking about it and has great demos. So from that point of view, we're driving that envelope, we're making sure that we get the components ready for more innovation. So with that, no company can do it alone. We must come together as an ecosystem. We do believe in partnership, we do believe in working together and enabling you, and in that same time you enabling us. So if you want to talk with us, we're here still until Thursday. We'll be after these talks as well in the break. Come and talk to us, come and work with us. I think we have very exciting opportunities coming ahead of us. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Vincent. Thank you, Vincent. You mentioned there battery life in your presentation. Probably one of the biggest factors that you need to look at when you're deciding your business case for your IoT solution and the customer, how they will accept that, because it's the most expensive component, and the more efficient that you can be with your battery, the cheaper the battery you will be. And it's not just about the module either, it's also about the network. And something that the GSMA 5G IoT group have been working on over the last year of how you do that and how we can get that growth that we've all talked about this afternoon. So to tell us a little bit more about that, our next speaker, Igor Tovberg from Sony Semiconductor. Igor.
Hello, can you hear me? Good afternoon. Great pleasure being here. After 2 years that we haven't met in person, and I see many people here, and I actually recognize many of you. Today we'll talk about the energy efficiency, and as Shane just said, energy efficiency is highly important for IoT applications. Part of my presentation is going to be a bit technical, so I'll try to keep it simple. Let's start. Yeah, for those that doesn't know me, my name is Igor Tovberg. I'm responsible for product marketing at Sony Semiconductor Israel. We develop cellular IoT chipsets, and we focus in ultra-low power, small chipsets for cellular IoT. Our chipsets are being used and being shipped in millions, and are being used in multiple verticals, like smart metering applications, like wearable devices, consumer electronics, trackers, and many more. The second part of my presentation is going to be as my second role that I'm taking currently under GSMA. I'm a vice chair at the 5G IoT strategy group, where I'm heading an energy efficiency subgroup. Our group consists of several members coming from mobile network operators, coming from chipset companies, coming from module companies, and also from the infrastructure vendors. Those are the experts in the cellular industry, where we join forces to bring a new document that would be a guideline for the device developers to make your devices much more efficient that you probably develop these days. Let's take a look at a few verticals at the cellular IoT space, and a few of these verticals has been mentioned by the previous presenters. Let's start with the mHealth. Historically, most of the mHealth devices are being using BLE and Wi-Fi connectivity. But now, when we are transforming into cellular space and introducing many new use cases for mHealth applications, we see more and more device makers that are transforming the legacy BLE and Wi-Fi technologies towards cellular. Let's say the devices like pulse oximeters, like blood pressure monitors, glucose meters, supposed to be traveling with the patients, with us, with the people that are wearing these devices all over the globe. And we would expect that the devices will be always connected. We provide simplicity by cellular devices. There is no need to pair the cellular device with the smartphones. There's no need for any gateway in between, and we provide the direct connectivity between the cellular device and the cloud. Another vertical is the smart cities. As Chen mentioned, we are seeing a very big growth of smart city applications. And for some of the cases like smart lighting, probably the power consumption is less critical. But for example, if you are talking about devices like parking sensors. Such devices are supposed to be installed on the ground, and these devices are supposed to be operating for several years. Nobody is expecting to send some maintenance guy to replace the battery every few days or months. Another vertical is the agriculture. We see a rising demand for all types of sensors for agriculture, and in this case, we are also talking about devices that are battery operated. Point of all devices that has been using traditionally higher LTE categories like Cat 1, Cat 4. In some of the cases, these are 2G-based devices, but the big problem that the industry experienced with is the battery life. Such a point-of-sale device is supposed to be recharged every day, and the new technologies, LTM and MWC, are bringing much more power-efficient technology to power such devices that would enable much longer battery life that is measured in months, not just weeks. Another growing vertical is trackers, and there are multiple types of trackers exist, like personal trackers, telematics trackers, logistic trackers, and the common thing for all these types of trackers is the battery operation. We would expect for an operation for such devices, again, not in a matter of hours or days. We are talking about weeks and months, and in some of the cases, also years of operations. Consumer electronics, wearable devices, smartwatches. We are shipping our chipsets also into this industry, and for such applications, we wish to make the device smaller. We integrate the MCU, we integrate the SIM, so the SIM is integrated in such devices, and we try to minimize the power that such device would consume. There is no space for a huge battery. This is a wearable device, so we have to take care for the power consumption aspects. And the last vertical here is the smart metering, which I think is the fastest growing and the vertical that demands also battery-operated devices. If you're talking about electricity metering, that's right. It's it's less affected by the battery. But if we are talking about gas and water meters, for such applications, the expectation of the battery life is for 10, 15, and in some of the cases, we are talking about 20 years of operation by a single battery. So our aim is to enable by technology integrated in the devices and also by the network to provide such long battery life for these devices. So what we did at our group, the energy efficiency group with my colleagues, we wrote a white paper. The white paper is available for download at the GSMA website, and you'll get the link. In that white paper, we cover multiple techniques that has been defined by the 3GPP standards. We explain what are the benefits of LTM and MWC. We did a comparison with the 2G technology. We explained what are the features delivered by the release 13, release 14, and also by release 15. We did the comparison between the power consumption that the device would consume, assuming the device is operating at LTM and MWC versus 2G. And for 2G, in some of the cases, we saw a much higher current consumption, and it comes in the range of X6 higher current consumption compared to LTM and MWC. We are talking about different power classes that has been defined by the 3GPP, like the typical applications that are operating at the 23 dBm, the power class 3. But for some of the cases, we have a need to operate at a power class 2, the 26 dBm, for metering applications to have a wider coverage. And for some of the cases, there is a power class 6 operation with 14 dBm, which is targeted for coin cell batteries. At the last portion of the document, you'll find the reference examples of the setups and the measurements that we conducted, and based on these results, you can see how power efficient your device compared to other technologies existing today. And in the document, we pick up 2 use cases. So the first one is the smart metering application. And as I said, electricity, let's put it aside. But for gas and meters, there is an expectancy of many years of operation. So once you design a product that's supposed to be running for that kind of long period of time, we have to properly define how frequently the device is waking up, what is the amount of the information the device is sending to the cloud. Should the device be accessible from the network? Should the device be sleeping and waking up once in a week or once in a month or maybe once in a minute? So all these should be defined, and based on these parameters, you have to define the power budget and the battery for your product. And the last item for the smart metering, this is a photo. The firmware upgrade over there, this is a highly important feature that must be supported, and it also has to be taken into account for such devices. The network is being upgraded. The 3GPP is releasing always new features in the standard, and the products that has been deployed and operating in the field has to have an ability to be upgraded over there to be comply with the network and provide, for some of the cases, even longer battery life than they have been initially planned. Other type of application that we are covering in the document is the trackers, and as I said, multiple types of trackers exist. It could be a logistics tracker, personal tracker, kids tracker, pets tracker, and for each one of those trackers, we have absolutely different profile, different battery, and different mode of operation. We may consider a combination between the PSM operation and the EDRX. And for each and one of the use cases, you have properly defined the operation and the proper battery capacity. Well, that's a bit scary slide with a few of the parameters that have a direct impact on the efficiency of the cellular product. So I wouldn't go over all of this, and just to let you know that we cover and explain each and one of such parameters in the white paper. We explain what is the impact and how is the proper way of operation of each and one of these parameters in your device. One of the examples that I want specifically to have a higher attention is the RAI, Release Assistance Indication. This is a feature that has been initially introduced in Release 13 and has been expanded in Release 14. This feature enables the device to announce the network that there are no upcoming or incoming messages are expected, and by that simple messaging, we enable the device to consume a huge amount of energy. This amount of energy might be converted for not days, but years of operation in smart metering devices. Once you design your product, please put a high attention for these parameters as well. Another point which is highly important to take into account is the application communication protocol. And there are protocols, multiple protocols exist like TCP, HTTP, UDP, and there has been some protocols that has been specifically defined for IoT application. And in my example, I'm talking about co-op. So for this example, we took the same amount of data, let's say 100 bytes of data that's supposed to be delivered from the device to the cloud. And you see visually, it's clear. Once we use HTTPS, the overhead of the data is much larger compared to co-op. The time that takes to deliver the same amount of effective data is much longer than co-op. So the clear recommendation is to select the proper protocol and consume the energy from the protocol aspect as well. Few test profiles and scenarios we defined for ourselves, and this will be also a guideline for you in the document, like PSM, Tau, EDRX, transmission mode, eSIM profile, swap, and a few more. We took 3 radio technologies, LTE-M, MWC, and 2G We did the comparison between those two technologies, and all guidelines are in a document. And we are almost at my last slide to explain you how we recommend you to take the measurements. We provide the test profile picture. This is the picture that you would expecting to see at your test equipment. We provide an exact steps of the measurements. The device is supposed to be powered on, get registered to the network, send some information, get back to PSM, etc. We define each and one of the steps. We provide the proper configuration, not just on the device type, but also for your test equipment. And at the end, at the last two lines, we provide a reference information about the expected power consumption, energy consumption for your device for each and one of the test points. So at my last slide, a few items to highlight. It has to be carefully taken into account all aspects of the network configuration and the device configuration. We recommend to avoid using frequent on-offs at your product and use the PSM. At the idle states, we recommend to use the EDRX and to play with different paging cycles. We recommend to use release assistance indication. We recommend to select the proper radio technology, and the 2G is already being sunsetting. So the only true, proper, and the right technology for the 5G IoT is LTM and NB-IoT. And at the last row here, last line is the link for the energy efficiency white paper. Please feel free to download the white paper. It's absolutely free. And having this opportunity, I would like to thank my colleagues at the 5G IoT Strategy Group for your great contributions. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Igor. Now we come to the panel session, and I'd like to invite our moderator, Silvia Kikicha from UCLA. And Silvia will then introduce our panelists who go across the ecosystem of IoT, and we'll be discussing, obviously, the trends of how we get to 5G, massive IoT in 5G. Silvia.
Thank you, Shane. Hello, everybody, and so good to see everybody in person. I would like to introduce my panelists in the order of appearance. So first comes Afzal. He's the head of innovation portfolio at Deutsche Telekom. We have Fabienne Petitgrand from Ubique, the CTO of Ubique. Luc Ibbetson, head of group R&D at Vodafone. Still getting ready. Nicolas Darmour from Sierra Wireless, Senior Director for Strategic Partnerships. And last but not least, Shara Muda, Director of 5G and IoT at G&D Mobile Security. So, hello everybody, welcome. It's really good to see you guys. I haven't seen you for, well, a couple of years, pretty much. So we have heard really interesting presentations from G&D, Transforma Insights, from Matt, Kigen, Sony Semiconductors. Over the next half an hour, we will discuss the current state of play of massive IoT. And as we enter the 5G era, we have the 5G networks, even some 5G standalone networks. We're going to look at the mega trends, the successes, opportunities that NB-IoT and LTM offers. So typically, enterprises rely on 2G networks to address some of the low power use cases they had. But as we have heard, 2G and 3G, so the legacy networks are being switched off. So some of the enterprises actually have challenges what is that they're supposed to do in terms of future-proofing their investments. So NB-IoT LTE-M networks are 5G compliant. They're part of 5G family. Let's make it clear at the beginning of the discussion. And most of the networks have already been deployed. So we have a lot of NB-IoT LTE networks. Shen mentioned 160 networks. And the whole old rivalry between NB-IoT and LTE-M is pretty much gone. We've seen operators deploying both. So what are the mega trends that you are seeing? So maybe starting to my left, Sal.
Mega trends, so can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Is the microphone?
Yeah. No?
Yeah.
Try now.
Hello, good afternoon.
Oops. Hello.
So, can you hear me now?
No. Can you hear me?
Wow. And now? Yeah.
Okay.
And I even lost my voice this morning, so I really need this. Trends, that's a good question and also a nice question because you know that I'm very critical when it comes to massive IoT. But I think now I finally can say that 21 was really the first year that I saw IoT and especially narrowband and LTE-M really grow. I mean, you can even look in this room at Mobile World Congress. 5 years ago until 3 years ago, the people in this room were MNOs, semiconductors, maybe some hyperscalers, but no solution providers of devices. And I see a lot of familiar faces, people who are doing trackers, smoke detectors, parking sensors. And these are typically the use case that I've seen really scale last year. And also smart building, parking sensors. The trend which I don't see yet is POCs on basically the new cases. If you ask me about the new cool IoT use cases which will really bring massive IoT, like bracelets and medical shoe soles, I cannot really come up with new use cases like that.
No yet.
Interesting. Shreya, would you like to add anything to this?
Yeah, absolutely. Good afternoon, first of all. I think from perspective of a SIM manufacturer, I'd really like to say that eSIM is really enabling mobile IoT, especially LTE-M and narrowband IoT, because at the end, it's more important to get these IoT devices out there. And these devices, as we all know, they do not have a power button, they do not have a beautiful screen, you cannot press them to get them started. They literally need to start out of the box. And this is really where we're going in and enabling, capabilities like in-factory personalization for narrowband IoT devices, or even RSP capabilities with lightweight bootstrap for narrowband IoT devices, because we believe it's all about future-proofing technology, right? I mean, as you rightly said, Sylvia, we're talking about network sunsets, and should all devices have an eSIM, should you have a network that's actually being sunset, then you could reach these devices remotely, you could trigger a new profile switch, and you could get the devices connected already. So as Igor said, if it's a smart metering device that's going to be sat there for 10 plus years, you need to get in touch with it in its life cycle. You need to be able to mend things.
Definitely. And maybe look, Vodafone has recently announced some plans around 2G, 3G network sunset. I mean, how are you dealing with this? Because you have quite a lot of devices, 2G devices on networks still.
We do, but fortunately we've been very active in making sure that the technologies that we've been deploying at scale now for a number of years, narrowband IoT and increasingly CAT-M as well, are extremely well positioned to pick up the legacy 2G traffic. I was just reflecting as I thought about the questions that we've been considering for this panel on our own internal plans. And when I look at how we are planning to operate 4G alongside 5G, there's only one line of technology in the entire chart that continues without any end, and that's the technologies that we're deploying for low power wide area, narrowband IoT, CAT-M. We start to think about where we might eventually start to migrate even some of the 4G technologies into 5G, but the narrowband IoT and the CAT-M remains operating through that entire period. So I would say if you're looking for any sort of a confidence boost from a network operator perspective, that these technologies are here for the very long term. Please be reassured. So that's our fundamental plan.
Definitely. And Nicola, what sort of megatrends you're seeing from your perspective, from the module vendor?
Yeah, from the Sierra Wireless side, so speaking as an IoT module manufacturers and working with a lot of different chipset vendors, so very early on working with the network operators, we understood that depending on the regional markets, so some markets were shutting down 2G early on, but one trend that we've seen is that there would be use cases for narrowband IoT and use cases for LTE-M, and that both would coexist. As a matter of fact, in the last 5 years or so, more and more networks have been rolling out both narrowband IoT and LTE-M. Yeah. Some started with the one, others started with another, but that's one of the huge trends we've seen confirmed. And so that's why, from a manufacturer perspective, we provided very early on devices providing both technologies at the same time, because from a hardware perspective, it's not very different in the end. The power efficiency strategies, as Igor was explaining, are very similar. So it's all down to the use case. And we had that option also to have 2G in addition for those markets, like in Europe, frankly speaking, in other countries where the rollout of the networks of narrowband IoT and LTE wouldn't be that fast, so that you could have all three technologies together. But long term, 2G will be shut off. I mean, we're talking a lot about that, 3G as well. But to reinforce what Luc was saying from the network operator perspective, LTE-M and narrowband IoT, they're here to stay, and they're going to be operated from the network side and from the device side for 10 years plus. And so there's not going to be a strong shutdown, because operators can operate both 5G and 4G spectrum at the same time using this so-called dynamic spectrum sharing technology. So again, be reassured, these technologies are here to stay, and you can deploy right now for decades to come.
I think that's an important point. Fabian, from your perspective, anything else?
You hear me? Yes. Yeah, I will echo that. So at Ubique, being responsible for deploying more than 500,000 smart meter, mixing both non-cellular and cellular technologies, we've faced firsthand the challenges of deploying cellular technologies for Massive IoT. And yeah, to those points, I think Massive IoT will only scale when it gets simple, and where you don't have to indeed ask yourself whether it should be LTE-M or NB-IoT or where is the coverage. It has to be LTE-M and NB-IoT. LTE-M will become the new 2G. And to echo that as well, I think LTE-M and NB-IoT will become simple when you also don't have to worry about whether I need to have 2G or 3G fallback. So LTE-M and NB-IoT will stay for the 4G and 5G era, and you will not have to worry about fallback technologies or coverage issues. And that's when it will be simple to deploy, and it will scale really.
Definitely. So,
sorry, can I just make one final comment on that, because it's one of the benefits of being back in a live situation where you can chat to people. Some of the proof points I've picked up whilst I've been wandering the halls in the last 2 days of people who've actually been deploying the technologies that we're talking about, especially narrowband IoT, into some very hostile environments, deep into sewers in some cases. And they're coming saying, well done, everybody. It's fantastic, because we've got 100% of every device connected in situations where, frankly, they didn't believe that they'd be able to reach it with 2G, let alone a new technology. So I think, to our point, we've already got 5G IoT deployed. We need to continue to build the ecosystem as we've been describing, but the fundamental connectivity fabric is there, and it will stay.
So that's my next question on the ecosystem, because we have heard about ecosystem from the previous speakers as well. And what is the role of the ecosystem in order to stimulate massive IoT adoption? And I think some of it is to help align some of the technical requirements with enterprise use cases, because at the end of the day, it's not all about technology, it's about the use cases. And how can we address this challenge? So, Afzal, yesterday you had some really exciting announcements that you're giving some developer kits away. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I think the microphone works now, right? No. Does it work? Yeah. Maybe I have to hold this. So we announced yesterday that we are going to give away 1,000 developer kits for LTE-M and narrowband IoT. I'm super proud of it, and the reason why is because You can see it over there. Thanks, Uta. Look, the ecosystem, a technology becomes successful and mature because of two reasons, and you need both. One reason is because of the technology itself, and the second reason is because of the ecosystem around it. And that's what we're still missing. I mean, narrowband IoT and LTM, they are amazing technologies, but we don't have an ecosystem yet. And if you look at how you build an ecosystem when you have a community. But before you have a community, you need fans. Yeah, and we, telcos, operators, semiconductors, we are part of the technology stack. Now let's look at the broader technology stack. PHP has fans. Yeah, AWS, they have fans. Docker, Kubernetes, they have fans. So, but here are two technologies which do not have fans yet. Narrowband IoT and LTM. Maybe we do have some fans, but they are sitting here in this room. So, you know, what we operators usually do is with new services and new technologies is we roll it out and we train our salespeople to try to sell it. We send our CEOs to CEOs of other companies, try to sell it. But what AWS did, they didn't focus on exploitation. After rolling out the technology, they focused on creating a community, finding fans, finding ambassadors. That's what all of us, we skipped that. Yeah, Vodafone, DT, Orange, the semiconductors, G&D, everyone skipped that. So I realized that only recently, and I thought, what can I do, you know, to let people fall in love with narrowband IoT? And it happened only recently, and this is basically the first step. We are going to give away 1,000 dev kits, and I'm not sure what we are going to do next. Maybe others have some cool ideas.
That's really interesting to hear. Turning to you, Fabian, you've had some challenges yourself when you were trying to develop LPWA, and that's why you launched a new product, Hermes. And that's release 15, cellular IoT. So can you tell us a bit more about the challenges that you're trying to solve with the solution and the role of ecosystem as well?
Sure. So we've been deploying smart meters at scale in Taiwan and other places, and we've been using cellular IoT as well. And we have faced the challenges of sometimes coverage or performance investigation. And we think that a little bit reflecting to that is compared to alternative technologies where you do have more vertical integration sometimes, which was talked about in a previous keynote as well, where you can have a system running end-to-end that you can get yourself. With cellular IoT, it's more difficult to get that running. So what we bring here is actually a small cell, LTM, NB-IoT small cell, that could be deployed either for private deployments, or as a complementary solution for public networks to extend the coverage. Because we do see that need where for LTM or NB-IoT to reach out to the 100% devices which you need to deliver from some massive IoT use cases, and smart meter being one of them, where you do have SLA to meet, then there is always that gap and that fear that what happens if I do not have the coverage. And that's what we want to bring to the ecosystem as well. And this could actually be also combined ideally with developer kits like that to actually enable as well faster adoption, where people can actually get it up and running wherever they are without having to care which mobile operators they are on or which countries they are on right now to develop the solutions.
Yeah, I think that's important, the out-of-the-box, just work solution. So back to that, roaming used to be a bit of a, well, is still a bit of a problem when it comes to NB-IoT and LTM. Is there any progress on that recently? Can you share anything around roaming and the work GSMA has been doing on that?
Yeah. So maybe, I mean, from within GSMA, there's a group called the 5G IoT Strategy Group, where all the ecosystem collaborates to make sure that for the users and the customers, the cellular experience, and especially roaming, which is a very strong selling point of cellular, works very well. In the early days of LTM and narrowband IoT, these did not work too well, frankly. But we've come a long way now, and there's a lot of roaming agreements specific to LTM and narrowband IoTs have been signed and implemented in the recent years, so that as a user, really, you can rest assured that when you deploy a device in a country, when this device now travels outside or is deployed in many countries with a single SIM, and there are a lot of other SIM technologies that would allow other ways to be on the network, but roaming is definitely part of the LTM Narrowband IoT package, if you will.
So we really truly getting there to make it at scale. So in this increasingly connected world, so everything is getting connected. We've heard, we're taking our watch to train us how to run and all of that. It is really important to mention the role of security, because if we have everything at scale, everything cloud connected, the surface attack is actually expanding. So Shara, could you share your thoughts on security, obviously coming from a company that focuses strongly on security?
Yeah, thank you. So there are a couple of things I want to focus on. The first one being hardware versus software security, right? And this is a proof point that we, as industry experts, needs to continue to educate the market and basically identify why hardware security is scalable. And it is what the industry needs to use, because it's not just having, for example, a SIM card being able to manage your secure keys, but you can also do firmware updates through secure management. We also have the capability to reach the operating system of devices and make changes on the secure operating system. It's one of the projects that we're currently doing with Google. It's called the Android Ready project. So hardware security is going to play a primary role, and along with that, there's also data security. I mean, the boss Carsten, he mentioned very clearly how important it is for data to be secure. The GSMA standards of the IoT Safe are great for the device to connect to the cloud, but we also have elements like trusted data, which are becoming more important for the ecosystem. And this is where G&D have developed a secure solution called SignIt. It was, by coincidence, it was mentioned in one of the previous speeches, but what we actually do is every time an IoT device sends data to the back end, we sign this data and we put it in a blockchain, which is more or less acting as a digital twin. So if an ecosystem of IoT, which definitely comprises of multiple partners in a logistics chain, for example, if anyone needs to be able to evaluate the data and check if this data is actual trusted data, then we have a solution that basically maps the data in the IoT platform to the data, the blockchain, to be able to validate this and bring this security for the ecosystem. And I think it's going to be very important to manage this off an ecosystem. And finally, I think also in terms of devices, today with IoT, as Afzal, you mentioned, we don't really know where the devices are being produced, right? It could be anywhere. And if we use secure elements like the SIM and have in-factory personalization with your secure MNO credentials on this SIM, regardless of where these devices are produced, you bring certain level of security into the industry as such. So these are my few thoughts, really.
Definitely. And then Nicola, Luc, you have anything else to add in terms of the work?
Yeah, well, I think indeed. So again, from the hardware perspective, so I'll take an analogy. So security, as is well known, so security is only as good as the weakest link. And I would take the analogy of a castle, really. So you can have a very strong castle, but if it's built on sand, you're going nowhere. So if you've got a hugely successful and solid software security stack, if you don't have those hardware elements as a foundation, you're really going nowhere. And now, as we're talking massive IoT, so we'll have probably per person on the face of the earth, so dozens of devices connected in the house everywhere. So what's called the surface of attack, so the potential areas where cyber attacks could happen and gather and hack data increases exponentially. So we need to be really sure, so all of that data, both for enterprises and individuals, is kept safe. And that starts with hardware, really. And so as hardware, so module manufacturers, so we partner with good partners like G&D and expert in security. I mean, if they've been doing so banking systems and bank cards for decades, that's probably good enough also for telecom applications. So it's really important to have this security in mind as a user and have security easily implemented. So it's a given for the user, it's a given for the customer, but all the things, so using the SIM card, whichever variant, so physical SIM, integrated SIM inside the chipset, so to have that and also to make sure that whenever you roll out a new firmware, the module is also on par with the network security, so that the whole chain is completely secure.
Brilliant.
Definitely. And something we mentioned before is we were walking around the halls, so this year we can actually go and see what's going on. And one thing that struck me at Vodafone's stand was a lot of phones hanging around from the trees.
Yes. Yeah.
So I just want to ask you, gentlemen, about the net zero, the sustainability, and the role IoT can play, because IoT can play quite a big role. So who wants to get us started?
Well, since you raised the prospect of our super green and forest-like stand. So yeah, you can go and visit on stand 3, and there's a couple of use cases there which I think are quite inspirational in terms of the impact that the IoT technology can have on sustainability. And in particular, looking at the smart forest, which sounds bizarre, but this is how we're thinking about it. Given that around 1/3 of the CO2 that we generate as a planet is absorbed by trees, it's an absolutely essential part in managing the health of the planet. So we've developed an IoT-powered device which measures the circumference of the tree trunk. It can also measure the temperature, the soil density, even the sway of the tree. And what it allows the Forestry Commission, in this case Forestry Research in combination with the UK government, it allows them to very, very accurately monitor the health and the growth of forested areas that you wouldn't otherwise be able to get to. And if you think about that type of technology being applied to forests more, globally, and you've got the ability to bring all of the power of AI and machine learning to help look after the growth of the trees that's so essential for the planet, then I think it's a great application. On the flip side, there's another one hanging from the tree which is there to detect illegal logging. So in Romania, for example, I think they lose something like 20 million cubic meters of timber every year and only 1% of the people going and illegally chopping down trees are ever caught. So we're hanging this thing in trees. It uses, again, IoT technology to connect back to an AI-powered capability in the cloud, which listens for the sound of illegal logging from up to a kilometre or more away. So it can differentiate between the sound an animal might make or even a phone ringing. If it hears somebody chopping down a tree or the sounds of logging, it can recognize that, in real time alerts a ranger and go and apprehend the villains. So I think they're just two quick examples of how I think we can have a fundamental impact on the sustainability.
Definitely. So anybody else is working on net zero sustainability use cases or any other interesting use cases?
Yes, well, we are actually focusing on energy management solutions, and that's what we deploy, starting from smart metering, but also a lot of microgrid application, so monitoring solar panels and batteries to make the best use of the energy and electricity, and reduce our overall footprint. And that's a big aspect. And of course, all those elements, batteries, solar panels, transformers, need, in that case, to report data and to be connected in an affordable and low power way, so that the overall use case does add up. So definitely those solutions are going to have a positive impact on our footprint moving forward.
Yeah, we've been seeing a lot of presentations this morning as well, wherein you have a lot of SIM cards and a lot of plastic associated with it. So we've taken first steps to really bring the green SIM and bring out the eSIM. I mean, both G&D and all the other SIM vendors as well. I think the eSIM is really going to bring that change in momentum, because you're not necessarily going to have that much plastic around. And we've started to also innovate on top of that. With the launch of the iPhone 13, for example, we have multiple enabled profiles on an eSIM, right? So you can have a Deutsche Telekom and a Vodafone profile on the same SIM card. So you're really limiting not only the SIM card side of things, but also the SIM slot, and you're really making devices more compact. And we had presentations as well that stressed about the integrated SIM and the form factor and what that can bring about from a change perspective. So we're really seeing first steps in terms of embracing sustainability and thinking about a sustainable future. And from G&D's perspective, we're also working with hardware manufacturers who have the same sort of mindset to be able to bring a sort of unique solution that we can bring into the IoT market. So there's quite a bit of momentum here as well.
I'd say it's quite interesting you would ask that question, because I mean, we're all here very happy, at least most of us, myself including, so to meet, but I mean, we shouldn't be too naive either. I mean, meeting together has a price on the environment and in terms of energy spending, so people taking planes. So we need to be very conscious, and especially looking at the news. I mean, the GIEC just issued their new report on what's waiting for us, what we should do. Energy prices soaring, so as an industry, we need to be very conscious that we must make efforts, and so that's all the way from using raw materials, plastic, semiconductors, to energy savings. Igor was talking about how IoT devices can be very sober in terms of energy. So there are technological solutions to help us as well, and in monitoring the energy usage, we can contribute to offset some of that energy we're actually spending in our modern life. So let's continue to do that.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, I look at it from two perspectives. I mean, when it comes to energy, I see more and more solutions for energy harvesting, but also from a use case perspective. You just said, like, what role can IoT play? But I think IoT is already playing that role, because with a link to your first question, the trends, if I look at those use cases which are scaling right now, it's basically predictive maintenance, to have less cars driving around with mechanics. Yeah. Or to have less cars searching for a parking place in a crowded city. Those are really the use case that I see scaling, or waste management, or reduction of food waste, or reduction of medication waste. To be honest, this is a great thing about narrowband and LTM. All the use cases that I have on top of my mind, if you ask me, like, what's happening right now, they are all about sustainability. I even have on my bike the air tracker from Sodak, just to get a data for the municipality, just to measure, like, what's happening around, you know, and the municipality can use that information basically to improve the air quality around us.
Definitely. We are near to the end of the panel, so maybe if I can ask, short term and long term, where do you see the successes and opportunities in Massive IoT in the 5G era? Maybe starting now from the other side. Shall start?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think it's about working together. I think Nicholas mentioned very clearly, and it's about complementing each other to make sure that people who are building these devices have the right tools. And standardization, the role of GSMA, I think these are the aspects that we really need to push into the market.
Nicola?
Yeah, I think so. One of the greatest successes that we'll see is really, so in the massive IoT, because that's what we're talking about, managing to reduce the impact of each device so that it's massive but it's sustainable is really what we're all working on together. And from what we're seeing now, we're on a good way to success. So let's continue.
So I think, well, a couple of points. First of all, I do agree that we need to be collaborating a great deal. I don't subscribe to the notion that we're without friends on this. Quite good to have some diversity of opinions on the panel. But I think the immediate priority for us is to help customers transition seamlessly from where they are with the 2G, 3G networks onto the technologies that we can help them help to create a long-term sustainable solution for them. I also think it's good to bear in mind the obsession that we had as an industry a few years back on the cost of some of the LPWA devices, because if you look at the value that they create, especially when you put in devices out into the field that you're not going to have to throw away and replace a regular interval because it might be something that's in field for 10 years, that's actually very inherently sustainable. So I think I welcome the fact that we're looking at use cases that consider the value that the technology is bringing to whichever outcome you're driving, and the cost part is just one small element in the overall solution. So I think having that mindset as we look at driving the uptake of the technologies now that they're there, and I think that's where I'd like to see the emphasis.
Well, yeah, I think one of the success is actually that Massive IoT now the foundation is there. Indeed, it has not delivered as per the analyst might have predicted, but what is for sure is that now the technology is there, it's happening. So what we know for sure is that it's going to be delivered in time. So I think that's already a success. The technologies are finally coming together and deployments are happening. So it would be slower than originally anticipated, but it is for sure happening, that we have this certainty now. So that's a success we can see moving forward.
Last but not least.
Yeah, I think I can second that. It's already happening. The technologies are mature enough. I think the last missing piece is that we, this ecosystem here, that we need to do a little bit more market development to make more people aware of the opportunities.
Definitely. And with that, this is all we have time for. Thank you everybody for coming, and hopefully you enjoy the rest of the show. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. What an interesting panel session that was, where we heard, the contrasting views of the different players in the ecosystem. And again, thanks to Sylvia as well for moderating that session. Great questions again. Just a reminder to you, just before we have our last speaker, we've got sort of two halves of the IoT Summit, and we're going to have a very short break while for health and safety issues, so we have some cleansing and changes of personnel as well. And in the second half session, my colleague Andrew Parker will be guiding you through the topics of data and leading us through the different speakers. And around SIM as well. So our final speaker, Stephen Douglas, who's going to talk to us a little bit, how green can 5G IoT be? So Stephen is from Spirent Communications, so welcome, Stephen.
Thank you, and it's great to be back again at Barcelona. I'm Steve Douglas. I head up 5G market strategy for Spirent Communications, and I'm an advisory member for the UK 5G innovation networks. You heard a little bit about sustainability at the end of the last panel debate, but I really actually want to challenge our thinking a little bit and ask, can actually the broader 5G and IoT networks and ecosystems, can they really be green? And what do I mean by this? Well, back in 2019, I think many of us remember a young woman, Greta Thunberg, told us our house was on fire. It was a pretty startling warning. And 3 years later in 2022, our house burns faster than ever before. We're likely to reach 1.5 degree, probably early 2030s. Weather extremes are increasing in frequency. We need net zero emissions sooner rather than later. And of course, into this world comes 5G, a technology which is promising is going to change our world. A technology that wants to be a general purpose technology like the automobile, like electricity, something which is seamlessly used by consumers and by industries alike. Surely this technology has the potential to enable green outcomes in high-emitting energy inefficient industries. Surely that is a role that 5G can play. But, and this is a big but, there are many people who are concerned about 5G. We hear this all the time from our customers, we hear it from the media. And why are they concerned? Is because they hear these messages like there's going to be 300% more cell sites and base stations as we densify our networks, as we densify our urban inner city environments and our macro network infrastructure. They're hearing there's going to be 10 times more antennas on the massive MIMO antenna arrays. thousands potentially of more edge servers as we disaggregate the network and distribute it out to closer to the end user. Hundreds of more data centers as we process more and more big data. We do more and more AI. And as you heard earlier on, potentially billions of more devices as we instrument everything. So why wouldn't these people think 5G is going to be inefficient? It's probably not going to be green. So that's a question that the industry has been asked. Can 5G be green? Well, the good news and the positive news is that the telecommunication industry understands this and has been working on this for many, many years. Sustainability has been in the heart of the design of many of our networks for the last number of years, and it continues to be, with activity being driven by the GSMA and by other organizations. Our network equipment manufacturers' roadmaps focus on new technologies and new innovations for energy efficiency. So to give you some examples, in our next generation radio, we're seeing the implementation of new technologies like idle mode operations. This allows our radio to go into sleep mode, reducing energy consumption potentially by up to 70% from some of the work done by some of the leading network equipment providers. We're also seeing a broader set of radio optimizations today by the network equipment manufacturers, new types of energy efficient chipsets, and new technologies using liquid cooling rather than the traditional air conditioning units which are on many of our sites today. And again, in early work that we're seeing here, potentially that could reduce energy consumption by up to 80%. Switching from LTE as well and legacy technologies, 2G, 3G, also has a huge potential to reduce the energy consumption. The 5G network is proven to be more energy efficient. It's in our interest to get 5G rolled out faster and actually turn off some of the legacy technologies. And edge. Will we have thousands more edges that will consume energy efficiency? Well, studies done by major academic institutes are actually starting to demonstrate that disaggregation, distributing our network, hosting it, virtualizing it, will reduce energy consumption. And all of these edge sites, are they really going to manifest? Well, actually in testing that's going on at the moment, it's demonstrating we probably don't need as many edge locations as first thought. There's a potential here from studies to potentially reduce 25% energy consumption. Now, this all sounds great, but this is still very, very early, and there's a lot more work to be done by the telecommunication organizations. There is also something that needs to be challenged and done, and that is about transparency. We need agreement on metrics and KPIs and how we share that so that we do not end up greenwashing or greenwishing the world. But is this enough? And this really is the bigger question, is because the reality is that the ICT industry, its net contribution is probably 2 to 3%. 80% of emissions today come from 4 major economic sectors: energy and supply, agriculture and land, transportation, our industries and manufacturing. So while it's absolutely in our own interest to make sure that 5G and IoT are energy efficient, if we do not help these other energy consumers, these bigger emitters, then we've passed the point of no return. And this maybe is where 5G and IoT has its greatest opportunity. This maybe is the killer use case that we all keep asking, looking for. It's helping these energy inefficient enterprises not only become more agile and efficient for their business case, but have the secondary effect of helping them reduce their carbon emissions. That's the two sides of the coin that we should be focusing on. And let me give you some examples. I think Luke, in the previous panel, highlighted some of the examples that are already out there today. But if we just look at the industrial opportunity at the moment, by bringing in 5G and IoT technologies into our environments, such as our factories, for high-intensive, energy-inefficient activities like precision engineering, We can dramatically reduce energy consumption by simplifying all the myriad of inefficient communication technologies and unifying them under one or two technologies. We can again decrease the energy consumption in these environments. Studies are already showing that in our factories, by embracing these types of technologies, we could actually reduce energy consumption by 20%. These are positive gains that not only help these environments and these industries become more agile, become more efficient, become more competitive, but they also can potentially become more green. And it doesn't stop with our industrial and manufacturing facilities. It's also in our transportation networks. 5G, cellular technologies, and IoT have a big play here. Not only about helping enable autonomous vehicles, which will, with a role to reduce accidents and prevent loss of life, but to also potentially optimize driving efficiency with technologies such as platooning, conditional automation, which will have a net effect on reducing fuel consumption. Connecting our cars out to the intelligent transportation systems in our cities and on our freeways, with a net effect of reducing congestion and reducing fuel consumption. Safer vehicles, safer environments result in a reduced complexity of build material that goes into our vehicles, means reduced waste to landfill, safer environment, reduced again CO2 emissions. These are positive impacts that actually the technology can bring. And the agricultural opportunity that you heard about with our forests goes beyond into areas such as precision farming. There's many use cases you've heard about of IoT and 4G and 3G being used. I want to give you just one example here. A study was done just in rice production, one crop production. And by using precision farming enabled by communication technologies, we could potentially reduce 7 gigatons of carbon emissions. Now, to put that in perspective, that is about the equivalent of 1 billion trees that we would need to plant. So doesn't it make sense that one of the fundamental rules and opportunities for 5G, for IoT, is to enable these industries, enable their business cases, and enable their green outcomes? And the question is, do we wait until 5G is deployed ubiquitously across all our networks? Do we wait for narrowband IoTs and Cat-M to be everywhere? No, we start now, because there is positive benefits which can actually be achieved today. Narrowband and IoT, Cat-M, as you've heard, are already available en masse. This example here is an avocado farmer in Southern California. And for those of you who are familiar with avocado crops, they're a very water-intensive farming production for them. And what they looked at doing was instrumenting the farm for precision farming by having soil moisture sensors embedded around the avocado trees, by having actuators on the hose piping system so that they could control the watering supplies. So they could monitor how and when to water the soil to get the optimal crop yield, how to reduce water wastage and overwatering. Now, the outcome was in this farm, they reduced their water consumption by 75% by using a combination of low-powered wireless access sensors and a cellular connectivity controlling the big data, the analytics that drove how the farm would be operated. These are positive gains. Now, the one negative output of this is that his local water utility company prosecuted him, took him to court. They could not believe that he had reduced his water consumption by 75%. They could not believe he was not going to pay them as much money, yet his yields, his crop yields, were not only as good as before, but even better. He must be defrauding the system somehow. And this is the other fundamental challenge we have as an industry. While technology can solve many, many challenges, if civil society is not educated on the benefits or not understand the opportunity that our technologies can bring, it will lead to mistrust. And mistrust leads to misinformation, and that all that does is delay the adoption. So it is in our interest to educate civil society. So let's put this fire out, because I think the telecommunication industry as a whole has an opportunity to not only lead by example by demonstrating how it can be green and efficient. If it starts to define the KPIs, the metrics, and the transparency, it can stop any people believing of green wishing or greenwashing. I think the secondary thing is about enable global outcomes. Back to the killer use case, this is our role as an industry, to engage with the enterprises, the industries which are the high emitters, help them understand that adoptions of our technologies can not only help their business case, their efficiency, their competitiveness, but help them on their sustainability journey. And we need to align with civil society. We need to educate them and continue to do that. And the only way we can educate them is through transparency, by not hiding the numbers, by not hiding how we test for energy efficiency, by agreeing on the set of metrics and KPIs. And if we do that, we'll get civil society on board. And I think this is the greatest opportunity we have today. We have a long way to go. But if you ask me the question at the start, can 5G and IoT be green? I think the answer is yes. But let's try to exploit that opportunity to help these other industries, because that's where the real opportunity is to try to prevent global warming. So thank you very much.